live, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going, folks? I'm just getting my things ready here. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. We're going real late tonight, folks. I've been doing this since like 4 p.m. and it's like 2:15. That's just how I roll sometimes. I just like to crunch it all while I'm there and while I'm here. So welcome. Today we are talking about Saturn transiting the 7th house. Now, if you've been watching the live stream so far in this series all today, we've been reading from Stephen Arroyo's Astrology Karma and Transformation. That's eventually where I'm going to get the main reading for this video. But you don't have to, if you came here just for the reading on Saturn in the 7th house, you're in the right place. You don't need to watch the rest of this series to get in order to appreciate this video. But you might enjoy, if you do feel that you enjoy what you watch in this video, check out the early part of this series where we talk in deeper depth about Saturn, its nature and cycles, what it means in the natal heart, in the natal chart. Natal heart, that's interesting. As well as what Saturn means by transit. So, Saturn in the 7th is Stephen Arroyo. So eventually, again, we're going to read an excerpt from this book. Stephen Arroyo talks about Saturn through the houses in the context of the entire cycle of Saturn moving through the chart, starting at the 1st house and making its way around. There's really no starting point to this, especially because the starting point is wherever Saturn is when you're born, really. And the Saturn return is really the completion of your personal cycle in this incarnation for whatever it means. Before we start, I always like to say I'm a Vedic astrologer. I try to bring the wisdom and understanding of different cultures to a reading like this, a Western astrology reading, just so we can get various different types of context and cultural interpretation of the symbols at hand. But for me, I try to integrate the best of all these things for my videos. So I'm not just throwing in random facts just for its own sake. I'm trying to condense all these different views into one concise truth, and that's what I try to do in my channel. But I digress. In the Vedic sense, we consider that the health of any transit, like a transit of Saturn to a house, how you're going to take this, how you're going to take the lessons. The lessons are all the same for Saturn in the 7th. But the person who can deeply appreciate the lessons of Saturn in the 7th is the person who has positive planets, benefic planets in the 7th, like Venus or the benefic moon or Mercury in some cases, or Jupiter especially. If you have any planets there, then Saturn transiting this house, you might have an easier time because you've got resources, you've got a grip on your 7th house. But more particularly, not just the 7th house and what's in it, but also the health and state and positive aspects of that planet which rules the sign that the 7th house cusp falls into. I'm a Vedic guy, so for me it's the 7th sign from your rising sign is the 7th house. I mean, yeah, the 7th cusp, no matter what. In this case, I don't need to give you that context. Basically, whatever sign your 7th house cusp, the descendant, whatever sign that falls into, the planet that rules that sign is the carrier of your 7th house energy and your capacity to deal in relationship with others. So, if Saturn, let's say you're a Capricorn rising, that means that Cancer is the 7th, the descendant. It's the 7th house cusp. And that means that the moon's placement, wherever the moon is, this is going to help you grip your capacity to deal with Saturn's themes as it transits your 7th house. And if you have a well-placed moon, if you're a Capricorn rising, Cancer is your descendant. If you have a well-placed moon, it means that the planet which is carrying your seventh cusp, which is carrying your capacity to relate with others, if it's doing well, then Saturn moving through your seventh house is not going to be that hard of a deal. In fact, it'll probably be satisfying, although difficult. Saturn will bring challenges, but those challenges will make you feel satisfied that you have a positive grip on your capacity to relate with others in any sort of relationship. If the seventh lord is ill-placed, if it has harsh aspects to malefics like Mars, the Sun, or Saturn itself, then, like the moon in this case, for a Capricorn ascendant, the moon, if the moon is already being hurt by Saturn, and if it's being damaged by its well, it doesn't have any enemies, but the moon never has enemies, but if it's being damaged by a malefic like the Sun or Mars, or if it's in a sign that is like not friendly to it, or if it's in any sign like this, or even the 11th or 8th house, which bring lack of stability and structure, then Saturn transiting the 8th, Saturn transiting the 7th house is going to be a more difficult time if you don't have a capacity to grip a strong foundation on that planet, which is providing the sharing and inter-exchange of resources and energies and love from yourself to other people. Venus as well. Venus being kind of the karaka of the 7th house, the indicator of the 7th house. If Venus is not well placed, then you're not going to have a grip on your relationships, and when Saturn comes through and puts pressure on your ability to take all the lessons that you've learned so far in your Saturn transits, when it comes time to present them to the world, to others, in ways that they can relate with and understand, if Venus is not well placed, and if the 7th lord is not well placed, and if you have an ill 7th house in general, then Saturn will put a pressure on you that will be difficult to get the lessons from, difficult to fully deal with in the time that Saturn comes. And by the time, if you don't deal with it while Saturn's in the 7th, then it'll be gone once it gets to the 8th. And then you'll be in relationships that you are forced, kind of stuck in now, and you have to deal with the energy of the 8th house through relationships that aren't worthy of you because you weren't being discerning about when Saturn was in the 7th. You weren't opening your eyes, you weren't dealing with the lessons that the universe was trying to show you through Saturn. So it's the Saturn in 7th always has the same lessons. It's up to your personal relationship to relationships to define whether Saturn's lessons in the 7th are going to be constructive and ultimately feel good and satisfying, or whether it's just going to be a bitter kick in the ass towards a part of your reality that you need to deal with. Because we are all individual organisms in the same way that your liver has to transmit some of its energy to your lungs, and your lungs have to transmit its energy through some kind of distillation process to the kidneys. All of these organs interact and interrelate as individual organs as part of a greater organism. In the same way, you as an individual are an organ as part of a greater organism. You have to deal with others. And if you've been ignoring that, and if you don't have a good Venus, and if you don't think that this is all that important, then when you try to use your ability, your willpower, and the things creatively that you want to express in the world, they won't find a grip because you need others. You need to relate with others in order to get the best out of yourself. Everybody does, whether you like it or not. So with all that being said, let's just hear a little bit about what the 7th house means. This is from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology by Richard Fish and RYAN KURCZAK. Again, I like to bring in these Vedic things, but this book is essentially just giving us, it's my favorite book for reading into the essential fundamentals of what the houses represent at their own level. I like to say that when Saturn's transiting the 7th, it is a continuation of the 4th and the 5th and the 6th into the 7th in the way that Stephen Arroyo is going to talk about in the next reading of this of this video. But this first reading is trying to just show how when Saturn transits the 7th house, the 7th house theme is a permeating quantum energy vertice for the 7th house principle that is shared in all of your incarnations and all your past lives all at once. So the 7th house has its own themes, not just in a cycle of all the houses, but just to the 7th house in general as relates to your soul, if that makes sense. So what does the 7th house imply? The keywords, it has an affinity with Libra and Venus, as I said, because Libra is the 7th sign. And so the 7th house has these Libra tones, which is ruled by Venus. The key words for the 7th house are marriage and long-term relationship. The 7th house indicates all important partnerships of any sort, whether that's your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your siblings, cousins, and family things, but also co-workers, bosses, employees, unders and overs, all the types of relationships, teachers, students of ours, all these relationships that we might employ. We employ them. People get value from the value that we intrinsically have and express through our talents and creativity and our creative expression and our management and 6th house things, you know, from the 4th to the 5th to the 6th. People get this, everything that's valuable in us, through how we relate to them. And if we can't relate to them, if we've got all these valuable things, but we're honestly absolutely a bad communicator and can't make it seem attractive to people. It's like the 4th and 5th and 6th are all us building up. The whole, actually, Saturn's journey from the 1st house through to the 6th house give us value in a way. And then when we get to the 7th house, we build on uncovering the dust from the gem that we've developed while Saturn was transiting the 1st to the 6th, in order that we can show people that we are a gem worth appreciating. Sometimes half of appreciation is knowing that something is worth appreciating. Because how many gems are left in the dust in this world that don't get the appreciation they deserve? It's because they haven't developed on 7th house and above presentation of those talents developed while Saturn was in the incubation period of going through the 1st to the 6th. The specific indications of the 7th house include the spouse, married life, all long-term relationships and partnerships. Saturn also gives us an emphasis on sexual passions and desire. Saturn will actually probably bring out a need to deal with our ability to relate passionately and sexually and abundantly in the same way that the 2nd house does. What am I? How can I relate in a way that my interaction with others has no resistance but is in fact attractive and brings the attractiveness inherently of what I am in my 1st house so that people just intrinsically relate with me. It's the 7th house that brings a sense of the importance of this dynamic of sexual, you know, lock and key types of harmonious psychologies with other people so that there is a long-term relationship that is worth employing with this or that person. It's our sexuality, it's our attractiveness that brings people who see what we've got going on, the vibe we got going on. If we got a good 7th house, good 7th lord, good Venus, and you know, whatever we got going on is looking juicy to all the people around, then it's like, I got to see what this person is. And it's that kind of attractiveness that brings people who enjoy life for its own sake to us, who are also jiving in harmony with the presentation that we give off. Saturn in the 7th teaches us to put across a presentation which shows how another person could bring out the best of our potentials. It shows what our potentials are and brings out the best in us. A bit of bait, a dare, a challenge, and exactly the way that humans need to interrelate. Saturn in the 7th is going to teach us all these things so that we can bring, through the nature of what we are, the best of the worth that we are through relating with others in a worthy way. In fact, Saturn in the 7th might bring relationships that are unworthy of us or that we are unworthy of, give us the harsh reality of why that is, and bring us forth to relationships that we are worthy of and that are worthy of us. The 7th also relates to residence in foreign countries because it's the opposite. It's the 7th from the 1st house. Saturn in the 7th might actually cause us to change where we live in order to have to be in an alien place, but to learn how to deal with that strangeness of being in a foreign place. And it also relates to veins and the loins, the genitals. And Saturn in the 7th might bring to the forefront problems with veins and blood pumping and all the sexual complications that might involve any problems in that area. If such a problem comes to the surface while Saturn's in the 7th, you might do well to do a little checkup on your kidneys and your genitals and your blood pressure and health in ways that can bring out the best of your sexual relatability in this way again, right? If it's important to you. Now, that was all of my personal rendition of the Saturn in the 7th experience. Let's read what Stephen Arroyo says about this transit. This is an important transit because it's an angular house, and so I've talked quite a bit about it for that reason. This is from Astrology Karma and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo. We are talking about the transit of Saturn to the 7th house. Like Saturn's transit of any other house, this position can manifest at a number of different levels simultaneously. A few of my clients began to establish business partnerships at this time when Saturn came to transit their 7th house. So I should say, Stephen Arroyo is an astrological counselor who has many clients who come to him just throughout their whole lives, really. He's an astrologer. And he really loves to use the best of his real-life lived examples of people going through transit experiences. He gets lots of data on his clients about what they're experiencing with Saturn in these places. It's a part of the strength of what makes this book so strong, is that it's grounded in the author's personal experiences with what he's talking about in the life of clients who express them. So Stephen Arroyo says, a few of my clients began to establish business partnerships when Saturn came to cross the 7th cusp. Again, it's usually within 6-degree orb of that cusp, which were usually consolidated financially. It's establishing business partnerships now, which are consolidated financially, gripped, finally made a reality when Saturn entered the 8th house. The 8th house being the second from the 7th, the committed material resource value sharing of partnerships. All relationships are taken more seriously at this time, and the person begins to take more responsibility to uphold his or her side of a specific relationship. The focus of attention, in most cases, however, seems to be on the individual's primary personal relationship or marriage. As Saturn crosses the descendant and begins its above the horizon semi-cycle, coming past the descendant and into the higher part of the chart where we're seen in public, there are often realizations about one's relationship needs, limitations, and duties. And this time also marks the entrance of the person onto a wider stage of public and social participation. If one has been taking any important relationship for granted, or has been feeling that a particular relationship is not meeting his or her needs, this will be the time to deal with it realistically. Saturn's transit of natal Venus is similar to this, or of the seventh lord, the planet which rules the seventh house, where the descendant lies. Saturn brings you down to earth in whatever area of life is indicated by its transiting house position. And here, you should try to establish a solid, well-defined approach to those relationships which have a strong impact on your overall lifestyle and your identity. Note that as Saturn transits in conjunction to the descendant, it is simultaneously in opposition to the ascendant. Interesting little bit of insight there. So that's why you should try to establish a solid, well-defined approach to those relationships which have a strong impact on your overall lifestyle and your identity. Those relationships which are a part of what you are. And your marriage is deeply a part of this, because who you are with your marriage partner is so deeply true, you're married to them. And so who you are with them and how you are with them actually blends and becomes your intrinsic, spontaneous, reactive expression of who you are. It's because of that seventh and first house relationship. If you are expecting too much from a relationship or marriage, or if you sense that it is unworkable in ways that are important to you, this is the time to face those facts with objectivity and detachment. A certain coldness and reserve in attitudes and behavior in close relationships often develops at this time, and your partner may wonder why you seem to have withdrawn from your usual ways of dealing with him or her. This, when Saturn's transiting the seventh, you might find yourself withdrawn from your partner, and they might be a bit worried. Why are you running away from me? And it's because you're trying to find the sense of self within your relationship, how to make your relationship feel like it is a relationship for its own sake, and it's not just something that I've mindlessly carried on. So you have to get distance from your lover to say, do I really love you? Is this really a working relationship? Or have we just grown so attached to each other that we can't let go of each other and it's become a bad thing? You need to gain a distance from your relationship at this time, possibly. And you might want to talk to your lover just about this if you're going through it. If it can be explained that you are simply detaching yourself from the other person for a while in order to get a clearer perspective on the relationship and on the extent to which you want to participate in it, at least the partner then won't tend to imagine things that are worse than the actual situation. Communication is key, especially if you're a person into astrology and you're like, yeah, baby, Saturn's in my seventh right now, so could mean a bad thing for you. And the partner's like, what? You be very careful with the way you apply yourself to your relationships with others. For your lover to hear that you're testing them, that you're looking for how good they are and worthy of you in a relationship. It's all just like, you might just embitter them, make them feel like they don't trust you, and you could sap what actually was supposed to be a relationship that you were supposed to be gripping more with Saturn coming into the seventh, which Saturn in the seventh is kind of a give or take in that sense. You're either going to discover that the relationship you're in is worthy of you and that you should commit to it in a more realistic way, or that it's not and that you should get out of it. Or if you're not in a relationship at all, then it's like, you're going to start finding relationships to deal with this energy through, right? There's no doubt that this can be a trying time for many people's marriages and intimate relationships. But the amount of stress experienced during this period depends upon the quality and level of authenticity that has characterized your relationship for many years. Very clarifying. In my experience, Stephen Arroyo says, In contrast to some traditional astrological assertions, divorce is no more common at this time than during the period when Jupiter transits the 7th house. In fact, it seems less common than the Jupiter transit period, for the Jupiter period is the time when one seeks to branch out and expand the boundaries of his or her relationships beyond their present limits. Right? You know, baby, I've been really thinking about that secretary at work and what she does for me. You know, that kind of like over-expansiveness of Jupiter in the 7th house. That's the place where marriage often gets a shaky, like a barnacle attached to some part of its destiny that it was not supposed to go into. But Saturn's transit through the 7th is a time of relationship decisions and commitments or recommitments. And perhaps the most important thing about this period is that it gives you the ability to see your partner more objectively, as an individual person totally distinct from you, rather than as an appendage or merely as an object onto which you cast your projections. In short, if a particular relationship is sufficiently healthy and flexible that it allows you to experience your own self fully and to relate to others and to society with full awareness, then it's likely quite workable. And that is what you will realize during this period, although that realization may come only after some severe tests of the relationship's quality. Probably from external circumstances outside of your own doing, which means you might not, you don't need to go start prying into your partner, checking them at that visceral of a level, whether they are committed or loyal or devoted or perfectly right for you. Time will show you how your relationship is. Saturn being the god, the planet, the manifestor, the arbiter, the surface of time. Otherwise, however, the relationship itself and your approach to it need to be redefined at this time. And decisions have to be made about how much energy you are going to put into it to make it workable. Tough subject to talk about, and I think that he is just the best because he is a counselor. He's a little bit of a relationship counselor too. And the way he put all of this is such a great, practical, realistic way of dealing with the reality. If you are if you're training to be an astrological counselor like I am, and you notice someone's going through a Saturn in the 7th, you don't want to just tell them, oh yeah, you're going to have a hard time with relationships, and you might be more discerning with your relationships. And the person could start thinking, like, what does that mean? Am I going to have to lose the lover that I have in order to find a better one? But I love the partner that I have, if they do love the partner that they have. Maybe they just need to be more discerning about how they are in that relationship. Likewise, if you are somebody who is taking advice from an astrologer, you can more clearly see what they mean when they say that this time period is calling you to be more discerning in your relationships. Not to be more discerning about the relationships that you're in, although that is true. But if you're in a good one, it's hard to know. No one can really tell. But if you're in a committed marriage or something like that, yeah, again, it's a tricky business to talk about. But the way he puts it in this book is the best way to do it. So feel free to read what I just said in order to get at that. Anyway, I digress. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That was Saturn transiting the 7th house. This has been a long video as well. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. I hope you guys are digging this stuff. And if you did, if this is your first time, if you just came here just for the Saturn in the 7th and you liked my reading, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment, ask a question, and I'll try to get back to you on it. And if you really dug this, check out the early part of this series where we talk about Saturn on its own as it relates to its natal aspects, as well as what its mythos is and what it's like transiting other planets and other houses. This earlier part of this series talked about that. So thank you for watching, folks. This is, of course, a continuation of our series on Saturn transiting through the houses. Next episode, we're going to talk about Saturn transiting the 8th. Saturn in the 7th, of course, represents the 12th house from the 8th. The house preceding, like the building on the foundation for the 8th house. And we're going to find out what that's all about in the next episode. So thank you so much for watching, folks. I'm Dustin.